Hello and welcome to the SCP podcast. SCP is the Society for Consulting Psychology. I'm Joni Cannell, your host for today. Our guests today are two assessment experts with backgrounds in industrial organizational psychology who have authored a book called The Hiring Handbook. Dr. Kasey Harboe Guentert and Mollie Berke both have impressive amount of background experience working for top consulting firms, as well as in-house at top Fortune 500 companies. They've conducted thousands of hiring assessments, and I'm going to let them tell their stories leading to where they are now. But suffice to say, right now, Kasey is an executive consultant with APTMetrics, and Mollie is a managing director at Modern Executive Solutions. So welcome, Mollie and Kasey.
Thanks, Joni. Hi, everyone. Mollie Berke here. My background is in industrial organizational psychology, as Joni mentioned. A lot of research in decision-making and cognitive capabilities. I've spent the last 13 years or so really specializing in leadership assessment. I've worked for some of the biggest global giants like Korn Ferry, Meta. I'm now at Modern Executive Solutions. The thread throughout my work has really been, I'd say 90% has focused on leadership assessments, really assessing leaders for selection or development purposes, and then sometimes working with them on development initiatives, either that or building scalable assessment programs for my clients. Very relevant to the book, and we're excited to dive in.
Excellent. Kasey, what about you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to everybody about our book and also some of the work that we've been doing and some of the research that we work on. So Mollie and I actually come from common backgrounds, really heavy focus on assessment, both worked at Korn Ferry and at Meta. And I also spent quite a bit of time at other consulting firms like ACT, which you may know from educational testing, but they also do a lot of workplace assessments. SHL, and then Korn Ferry, worked in a couple of tech firms, Meta and Airbnb, and also served a lot of tech clients throughout my time when I was at SHL and Korn Ferry, and now at APTMetrics. It's come up to about 25 years that I've been really deep in working in assessment. And I'd say assessment is a really big common thread across all of the work that I do. Sometimes I assess people and I'm trying to figure out how are they going to be successful in the job that we're looking at for them, or a group of people like a large volume customer service type of organization. How are we going to predict effectiveness for this large group of people based on what we know about what's important for the job? I also spend a lot of time assessing the jobs and the organizations to learn about what it takes to be effective if you're going to be a software engineer, if you're going to be a CFO, if you're going to be a call center rep, if you're going to be a dog walker, the example that we use in our book to start off with, or if you're going to be a machine operator. It doesn't matter. There is a way to assess every single job, and I feel like I've looked at quite a few of them.
Yeah, I would have to say true IO psychology. They're talking about how important the job assessment is too, not just the person. So, well, let's stop for a second and say, like, what actually inspired you to write the book? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I think I'll speak for myself. Kasey and I definitely share some of the motivations, but I'd say over the last 5 years, I've had more conversations with recruiters and HR leads and hiring managers, my husband, who's a small business owner, but a lot of common questions about, my team isn't performing well. How do I hire? What are the best interview questions? How do I know if someone's going to be really good in a role? And the answer always comes back to, well, what are you assessing? Like, what do you need for a given role? What matters? What does success look like? We got to figure that out first before we build your interviewing process or before I can support you in any capacity. So for me, I think that was like, okay, this is missing. This is missing in the market. There's some books out there that talk about all of these best practices. I'd say they're and a lot of them are excellent. And they're written to academics. They're written to IOs and HR professionals who really know the ins and outs of best practices. They're not written to my husband, who's a tech founder and runs a 10-person company. They're not written to HR teams, mid-level hiring managers who may not have a bunch of experience in building structured interviewing and structured assessment programs, building evaluation criteria. So we realized that this was a gap, and we were really excited to try to fill it. But Kasey, what would you add there?
Yeah, I mean, all of that is exactly the same for me. So many conversations, probably in the last year alone. I think I've been asked at least 20 times, what is it that's important about the interview process that we want to put together? And how am I going to help consolidate across marketing, across software engineering, across all of these different and very disparate jobs in my organization, that we have a consistent way to assess our talent, regardless of what level they're coming in at. And this is something that comes up a lot. And I think, okay, I would love to just give you a resource, and I can talk to people about it just like we're talking about it now. But honestly, where is like the book that you can take home and look at that is comprehensible to somebody who wants to apply it now in a practical sense in their job? And that was the gap that we are hoping to fill with this for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I found that immediately when I looked at the book, because there are some clients who just don't have the budget to hire a consultant to come in and do all that work. And when I saw your book, I was like, this is something I could provide to these clients. And like at your recommendation, Kasey, you're like, no, this is exactly why we wrote the book. And I was like, oh, fantastic. It's always good to be a resource, even if you can't get the work, and hope that they're doing the right thing. So why don't you tell us what the book is about, just sort of a highlight overview. It's very comprehensive, but what would you say generally it's about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we intended is just for people that are saying, how do I do a better job for my organization or for my team in creating a great experience for our candidates, and also ensuring that we're getting a really positive prediction. Meaning, when we do an interview, when we go through the process of assessing somebody for a role, how do we know that it's actually going to result in someone who's a better performer? I think that's one of the number one questions that I get is like, can you go back and tell me and prove to me that if you hired, 400 people for our call center, that they're actually going to be performing more effectively? And we come back with, okay, well, so there's a couple of things that research has told us that we need to do in order to bring them into the organization. And there's steps in the recruiting process that we can help you with. And they've been proven in multiple different research studies over and over again that they're actually going to help us to predict that out of those 400 people that you hire, the majority of them are going to be a really good fit for the qualifications that you set forth in the job. And so it's for somebody that's asking us those questions and they want to put it in place. I'll give you another quick example that I come across, and again, working with tech companies too. And I think, Joni, you and I talked about this in regard to the book that you put together for people consulting with technical organizations. And we find that some of the smartest people in our client organizations who are big problem solvers will hack their way into a solution for recruiting. And I love it. I love sitting down with a really experienced software engineering manager, software engineering director, who's decided, okay, this is how she wants to put together the entire process for the whole organization, including coding exercises, evaluations of those. And I'm like, the fundamentals are all here. You know what we need to do. It's a logical process. The mystery is not that great, but let's put it together in a way that's going to save you time and not cause massive headaches. And let's not over-engineer it, because that's not always needed. And I think over-engineering on one end is what happens, where we have like 30 people involved in an evaluation. We don't need that. Or then there's others, other groups that might be under-engineering, and they have like one person involved in the evaluation who's making all the decisions.
Yeah.
Go, Mollie, would you add to that? Yeah.
I mean, very, very similar thread, I'd say, applies to my conversations, and really what the book's about. I'd say I was working with like a Series C health tech company a few years ago. They were scaling really quickly. They were doing, I'd say, they were planning to do like 100 assessments in a year. they wanted to hire really aggressively. Each team had their own approach, though, to their interviewing process. There was no consistency. There was no shared criteria, process approach. They were not hiring the people that were going to help them achieve their goals. There was performance issues. Leaders, HR, was frustrated, I think, with some mishires. And then managers are ending up spending their time doing more coaching as opposed to the roles that they were hired for because they weren't getting hiring right. So we use the approach that is outlined in the Hiring Handbook to build a scalable assessment process, which was a structured interviewing program, starting with job analysis. So like Kasey just said, studying the role. What are the roles you need to hire for? What are the skills, experiences, any knowledge that is required for day one success in that role? And then building interviewing content. So interviewing guides, interview banks, question banks, and evaluation criteria that people are trained on using and doing so in a consistent way. That's the basics of structured interviewing. That's what the Hiring Handbook walks through. I would say in a really easy to digest way. That was our primary goal.
Yeah.
Kasey and I were very clear that we wanted this to be something that was really kind of your friends, Mollie and Kasey, writing to you about how to do this. It's a toolkit. It's meant to be flipped through, keep it on your desk. And it's really not rocket science. So we lay it out quite simply.
Yeah, starting with a dog walker example, I mean, that really hooked me right away. But also that you have a whole chapter on sort of essentially what's wrong with those out of the box, clever, crazy questions. So, I mean, maybe that leads a little bit to the question for me, like, what are hiring managers or leaders getting wrong about interviewing, and what kind of myths would you want to dispel?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think Mollie, we had so much fun, I think, writing some of those things, because between what you see on social media in terms of the myths of like, I think that some of the examples I saw were on TikTok where somebody has gone viral saying, okay, just ask them to calculate the height of the building that you're in, and you're going to learn everything you need about this candidate based on that. And I'm not against having some interesting types of questions, but I think the issue is that you have these questions in a vacuum, and that there's no way to assess whether it's actually related to the job. And so this is the problem that comes up over and over again. And once you explain it and say it out loud, like a lot of what we do in the field of social psychology, you're like, oh yeah, that's really Captain Obvious here. But, sometimes people don't realize that they know what they're looking for. And if you ask me to evaluate versus you, if somebody did well, very different criteria. And so I think one of the myths that is that a question, like a great question on its own, is the golden ticket to knowing how well somebody is going to do. That's just one of the three major pieces. The other pieces are about knowing the job. The other piece is about evaluating what the right answer is, meaning like, do they actually have the behaviors, the experience that you need for that particular role? So I think coming up with that, is interesting, but that's one that we consistently work with our hiring managers on, is they have great question banks and they're super excited. And somebody just made fun of the whole question, sell me this pen. The other day when I was talking to them, they're like, I bet you do not want me to have a question about sell me this pen. And I said, look, if you could probably convince me that sell me this pen could be predictive, but I want to see exactly what in the job they need to do that relates to that, and how you're going to evaluate whether selling this pen and what all the components are of how they sell this pen or whatever it is that you want them to sell is actually going to be predictive. And that's how we consistently get back to that 3-part process.
Yeah, I think that's huge. The questions matter, right? Questions need to be tailored to what is required for success in a role. But to Kasey's point that I 100% agree with, what matters more is that interviewers are evaluating the data they're getting from candidates in a structured and consistent way. And so we do walk through in the book, of course, how to build that criteria that's connected to job success. I'd say another myth or, things people get wrong about hiring, but really with regard to, the buzzword of structured interviewing, I hear this every single day when I'm talking to clients, is I don't want to be like overly robotic. I don't want to lose the personal touch that I want my interviewers to show candidates and building the rapport. That is not what structured interviewing is about. We do not want to take away the style and the personal, the personality that interviewers are bringing to candidates. Structured interviewing is about building out the process and using it consistently. And yes, having an interview guide and following the flow of it so candidates have a consistent experience is important. But no, you don't have to read from a script. You don't have to be overly robotic. Part of the upfront work, I'd say, in building out structured interviewing for a given role, and I actually just got off a training session right before we met Joni today, where I was walking through this with a client. Part of the upfront work after you've done your job analysis and you've kind of built that success profile is building out your question library for whatever it is that you need to assess. And you're not doing that in a vacuum. You're doing that with the appropriate experts who know how to best assess whatever the skill, technical or not, it is. So you're predetermining, what are we going to ask? And then how are we best evaluating and making sure we're all aligned on what good looks like. So I think that's really important to emphasize.
I think it's great that you're talking about don't be a robot. I mean, that is, I think, the big fear that people have. So great way to have them read the book and figure out what that really means. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that happen. Like people go from being like really dynamic and interesting to all of a sudden like making sure they get every word correctly on the page when they're like reading it out. So I look forward to seeing that and advise others to read about that. One thing I want to ask you though is that you say in some ways that the book can also be written for smaller companies, or teams that don't have a full HR function. And so like, what happens if they don't have all these resources to do this huge job analysis and create a, gigantic question bank and all that? What do you recommend? And what's in the book about that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that's actually a big chunk of our target audience is that exact group. So, and there's a couple of books that are out there that go through pieces of this, but we found, again, what we wanted to do is give somebody the entire package that starts with first understand the job and make a couple notes, like document what it is that you know about this job in terms of what people do and what do they need to be good at in order to do those things. That's the first part. And in fact, for somebody who is the hiring manager, whoever is the expert in this job is going to have an easier time whipping that out than me or Mollie or an HR person. And so when you know the job well and you are the person who's building your team of programmers, web developers, your team of marketing people, your sales team, you know exactly what you're looking for. But the idea is to objectively get that down. I don't know, Mollie, if you want to jump in on the next step.
Yeah, I mean, for the small business owners that have 5 to 10 employees even, I was just working between Meta and my current firm. I took about 6 months off and I was having a lot of fun with Kasey, starting up this book and also doing some independent consulting. And one of the organizations I was working with, it was a 4-person team, including the founder and CEO, the CFO, and some, critical roles. They're in the sports ticketing industry. And I was working directly with the CFO on building out structured interviewing for a few key roles that they needed to hire for. And they have no HR support. This is a startup organization. So yes, this person was the CFO, but it's a 4-person, very scrappy team. They're all wearing very many hats. And we sat down, we looked at their business plan. We kind of figured out what are the roles you need to hire for in the next year. And we figured out which ones he was really equipped to speak about in great detail. And he knew exactly what they needed to hire for. One of those was a head of sales. And so we really focused on building out and really studying the job through him in one other conversation. And I think in an hour and a half, we were able to put together the job profile and what the really required knowledge, skills, experiences, and abilities were. So it does not always have to be an over-engineered process. You don't always have to conduct a survey and have 12 interviews and focus groups. It depends on multiple things, right? I was working with a product design function in when I was internal. And in that specific situation, we were expecting to hire hundreds of candidates that quarter. So the volume was huge. The impact was different. So we did conduct a survey and we did host focus groups. In the book, we walk through, based on the complexity and the hiring volume, what's the best approach for a job analysis? What's the size of your company? And we walk through, okay, here's like the lowest touch process we'd recommend, and here's the highest touch that speaks to more complex roles.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that too. We give some guidance on the use of AI technology because this is a huge field within HR technology, right? And so there are so many really impressive entrants into the market that are claiming, and some of them are claiming this with good reason, but we can do a resume screen for you and we can cut down the amount of time that you have to interview, because we get that question a lot too. Can we do this without spending all of this time with people? Can we do this without all of those individual interviews? And that's a really tough one because it does kind of depend on the quality of the data that you're using to make decisions. So the quality of the data is good if you're a job expert and you clearly outline what it takes to be successful in a role, and you use that to build your assessment. You use that to build your interview and how you evaluate the answers to those questions. That's going to be great. You're not going to have a chance to do that as well with an AI technology. They may be basing this on data that exists outside of your organization, and we don't always know where that data comes from. And so we've gone into some significant detail, and we've also solicited the support from labor economists and research studies to show exactly how this works and what some of the cautions are before you jump into using a technology-enabled solution.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, like entering in some information to your favorite chatbot and asking it to develop the interview questions for you. I'm sure you address those kind of questions in the book. Yes. Okay.
We do, and we are not against it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we actually provided some prompts to develop content. We're just huge fans of human auditing of the content because, again, it's your job. You want to make sure you get the right people. Do you know your job better than ChatGPT? ChatGPT might write really well and might make it a little faster to come up with stuff, but I certainly find myself doing a lot of editing anytime that we're using some of our approved technology methods to generate content.
Wow, great insight. I think the burning question that a lot of people have right now, and I'm sure this will continue to happen as things continue to change, but I mean, a lot has happened at the federal level right now and changing in terms of hiring and all that. And I'm just wondering, how you respond to that. What's changed since you wrote the book in terms of hiring and what we should be thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's pretty important to note that research hasn't changed. So having diverse teams has been shown to have better outcomes for businesses, bottom line. So focusing on hiring practices that are inclusive, fair, and tailored to requirements for a given role is still best practice and recommended. So I am not advising my clients to do anything differently as it relates to best practices from a hiring and selection and decision-making standpoint, regardless of policy shifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we could tell that the policy shifts were going to come with the federal government even a year ago. That was clear, without knowing exactly how the administration would go at that time. And I think one thing that we tried to prepare our readers for is thinking through the use of the Civil Rights Act, which is just such a core common piece of legislation that guides the way that we look at employment, right? And so we actually created a chart that I love, and I reference it all the time, that shows your spectrum of risk. And there's a spectrum of risk on both ends. So one end is to be basically discriminatory and act like we're in 1952 with segregation in the United States. And then the other end of the spectrum is to do anything possible to create larger groups of diverse people in your workplace. It's illegal on both ends. And we put specific examples into this chart that give you a sense of the behaviors that have gotten people into hot water and that are going to continue on either end of the spectrum to cause issues.
That is excellent. Wow, what a resource. Outstanding. We're going to run out of time here. So I'd like to ask, how can people reach you? And more importantly, where can they buy the book?
LinkedIn, Mollie Berke, is definitely the best way to reach me. Buying the book, Amazon, the Hiring Handbook, or through our publisher, Kogan Page. And I believe we have a discount code that we can send through, Joni, if you want to post it with the...
I will post it. I will post it on our show notes. So yeah, make sure you get those if you're watching or listening. Look for the show notes.
Yeah, LinkedIn is also a great way to contact me. I am the only Kasey Harboe Guentert that you'll find on LinkedIn. So please reach out, like and subscribe. It's my favorite thing to say right now as I'm trying to get better at social media. But yeah, connect. And we post frequently with some tips and information about the book as well. So you'll see that.
Wow, this has been really enlightening. And I really thank you both for coming on to the SCP podcast. I think that this book, when we go out there and have people actually looking for it, is called the Hiring Handbook. Don't forget the Hiring Handbook, and you can find it on your normal connections there and you can also look it up on social media, and you'll find our authors, Mollie Berke and Kasey Harboe Guentert. So thank you, Mollie and Kasey, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to all of our viewers and listeners. We are SCP, Society for Consulting Psychology, and you can find us on societyforconsultingpsychology.com, and you'll see our show notes up there as well, and more discount on how to get the book. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.